my slides at this point. Late last year, when Blanche and Andrea Lloyd and I were talking about this presentation, Blanche asked about a picture to illustrate the talk that would help for advertising the talk. And I immediately thought of this view of the north end of the garage. And I'm sure that a fairly significant portion of the population of Livermore has seen this building as they drove by on Portola. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had that started off with, I've lived in Livermore for fill in the blank decades. And I've driven by that place a lot and wondered what it was and what goes on in there. So my goal for the presentation over the next 45 minutes or so is to answer those questions for you. And I'd like to do that by, let's see, whoop. Okay, I want to do that by talking about the history of the garage and its close coupling to the history of the Lincoln Highway, and also talk a little bit about what goes on at the garage. And there are projects that are done for the garage, and that is things we do to maintain and conserve the garage. For example, the upper right-hand picture on the upper right-hand corner shows when we several years ago, replaced the large signs which had been on the garage for decades, and it served well, but it deteriorated pretty significantly. So we had those replaced with new signs that were designed in the style of company signs, business signs in Livermore at the turn of the century. And there's also projects we do at the garage. And that lower center picture is two of our regular volunteers at the garage, Fred Dietrich and Jay Morris, working on a display of a pedal-powered mower blade sharpener. So that's one of the objects we have on display at the garage. So that's kind of the intent for the talk. So let's get into it. And I'd like to start with this rather busy slide. I don't intend to talk about all the points on this slide, and I certainly don't expect you to read all of these points, but the real essence of the message is in that photograph. Now that's a road in the United States at early 1900s. And so that's probably not the worst road in the country and probably not the best road in the country, but it's the way a lot of roads did look. So there was no federal program for highways in that early 1900s. Many states had no highway departments at all, and little, if any, state involvement in building roads. So it really fell to the cities and local communities to establish and maintain roads. Now in the larger cities, there'd be paved roads, but as you got further west in the country, roads tended to start looking like what you see in that photograph. Now, a person by the name of Carl Fisher was an enterprising person. He was involved in establishing the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and also establishing Miami Beach, kind of as a destination for people in the northern states, the cold East Coast weather. So he formed in 1913 the Lincoln Highway Association. Now, that association was dedicated to improving the state of roads in the country. And one of the first things they did was get involved with the establishment of the Lincoln Highway, which is important to the story of the Duarte Garage. Once that effort started, there's increasing momentum with corporate donations and public funds that began to improve the road network in the country. Oh, having trouble getting to the right slide here. There we go. So this map of the United States shows the route of the original route and some variations of the route of the Lincoln Highway. The Lincoln Highway was the first transcontinental highway across the United States. The eastern terminus was on Long Island in New York City, and it stretched across country, largely following the route of Interstate 80 much of the way, and ended up in San Francisco, in Lincoln Park in San Francisco. And you notice that there are some loops and alternate routes. So the Lincoln Highway was not constructed in the same sense that the interstate highway system was built in the 1950s and 60s, and where it was actually purpose-built as a federal highway project. Rather, the Lincoln Highway was designated using the best available roads. And from that earlier slide, it mentioned that west of the Mississippi or west of Chicago even, road maps were not very common. Road marking was pretty haphazard, and so it was really hard to know how to travel. It was more of stopping and getting directions to the next town. The Lincoln Highway was an attempt to improve that situation. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you see a photograph that concrete monument was the way the highway was marked in the 1920s. And the Boy Scouts of America were involved in a large-scale project to place these markers along the highway throughout the length of the roadway. So the marker, we're viewing it as if you're on the road looking to the side of the road. The red, white, and blue symbol with the blue L in it, that was the Lincoln Highway marker. And that was consistent across the highway, so people could recognize immediately that they were on the highway. Above that's a medallion, looks like a gigantic Lincoln head penny, and it is a profile of Lincoln. And that was, again, part of the markings of the highway. On the side of the marker facing the driver as they approach the marker is a blue arrow. And if you're traveling towards the marker and the arrow goes straight up the side, that indicates keep going straight on the road. If it bends to the right, as you can see the arrow on this marker does, that indicates turn right at the next intersection. And if it turns left, it tells you to turn left at the next opportunity. So that was kind of the GPS of the early 1900s along the Lincoln Highway. Okay, this is a more detailed map of Lincoln Highway as it left Nevada and entered California. You can see several routes marked here, and the legend, the different colors indicate the years of the alignment of the road. Generally, they came past Lake Tahoe over Donner Pass or on Highway 50, what is now Highway 50, to Sacramento, and then turned south. So the route came down the highway, down the valley, and to Tracy, in the vicinity of Tracy, and then came west over the Altamont Pass and through Livermore, and then on over the Dublin Grade to Oakland, where if cars wanted to go all the way to the terminus of the Lincoln Highway, they would go to the Oakland Ferry Terminal and travel across the bay on a ferry, and then to the San Francisco Ferry Terminal, and roads would then go on surface streets to the western terminus of the Lincoln Highway. So in the period of 1913 to 1915 or thereabouts, the road actually passed through Livermore, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But the road was later relined when the Benicia Bridge was built, and that was a shorter route to go down the route that is currently Interstate 80, across the Benicia Bridge to Oakland, and then across to San Francisco. So this is an old map of Livermore, and I'm doing this because I want to show what the alignment of the roads was in Livermore at the time the Lincoln Highway passed through Livermore and around the time that the Duarte Garage was built. So I've got a giant cursor, hopefully easier for you to see if you're watching on a small screen. So this is the Stockton Road. So I went out of Livermore, following with the route of what is now First Street, over the Altamont Pass to Tracy, and then turned north up to Sacramento. So the Lincoln Highway came into Livermore on this road. Now this area here, there's a person by the name of Sarah Ladd identified here, and this area was known as Laddsville. So the road came down here. This intersection is currently the intersection of Portola Avenue and First Street. This is a portion of First Street, which is now the old First Street, no longer connected to the new First Street because there's now an overpass over the railroad tracks. This road here, since this was Laddsville, this is known as the Dublin and Laddsville Road. So the road followed the route of this is now Junction Avenue, and on up here, and this portion up here is Portola Avenue. Now Portola Avenue currently bends to the east and proceeds along this one, intersects First Street to the east off this map. The little red boxes here are the Duarte Garage and Cottage, and at the time they were built, the road continued immediately past the cottage and garage and on over the Dublin Grade. So that was the original alignment of the Lincoln Highway, and that's key to why the Duarte Garage is built where it was. This is an overhead view from Google Earth showing the current arrangement of the roads. So this is Junction Avenue, which turns mysteriously into Pine Street when it makes that corner. So this is Pine Street. This is L Street going past the garage. So here's the garage and the cottage. And so you can visualize that the old highway went straight out Portola, but now you have to jog around the Duarte Garage. And this park is also key to the story of the Duarte Garage. We'll return to that in just a moment. This is a bother. Okay, so I want to say a little bit about the Duarte family, because obviously the Duarte family is key to the Duarte Garage as well. So this is a photograph of Frank H. Duarte. His parents were Frank G. Duarte and Mary Florence Duarte. They immigrated to the US from the Azores, settling in Niles in the 1860s. So Frank H. Duarte was one of 9 children. He was born in 1884 in Niles, and they had a farm or a ranch in Niles with orchard and vineyards and other agricultural activities. So Frank Duarte worked on the ranch for a while, but he was an enterprising person and prepared himself for life off the ranch later, as I'll talk in a moment. He eventually married Helen Hellquist, who came from Sweden, and they had 2 sons, Francis H. Duarte, born in 1915, and Earl B. Duarte, born in 1917. Both of them ultimately settled in Livermore and were part of the community for many years, for their entire adult lives. So let's follow now the life of Frank H. Duarte for a bit. As I mentioned, he was an enterprising person, and he prepared himself for his later life. He left Niles in 1909 and went to work in Oakland, California at a manufacturing facility, an ironworks. He then traveled east to Denver, passed through Denver fairly briefly, and then worked his way on east through Chicago, Detroit, as far east as Connecticut, Waterbury, and Bridgeport, Connecticut. And along the way, he was working at major industrial concerns, manufacturing facilities, machine shops. He worked at car factories. For example, he worked at Packard in Detroit, and Packard was in the premier car of built in the United States. Locomobile, another major company. Scoville was a major manufacturing company. So he spent the next 3 years working his way across the country. He was learning, gaining skills as a machinist, manufacturing, automobiles, and then returned back to the Niles area. And when he did return to Niles, I want to point out the reason we know that much about his life at that period is he kept a journal. And so this is a page from his journal showing from 1909 to 1912 where he worked. So he kept track of where he lived, addresses of where he lived, where he worked, how many hours he worked each week, how much money he worked how many hours he worked each day, how much money he earned each day and each week. He had a ledger in the back where he kept track of how much money he had saved up. And he also had the names and addresses of people he met along the way. So he was establishing contacts for his later life. This is another page of his ledger in 1911 when he was working at Packard Automobile Country. From this, we can see that he worked 6 days a week. The shortest entry in here is 9 hours a day, as much as 13 and a half hours a day. You can see he averaged sort of $3 or $4 a day, looked like on the order of $21, $22 a week on average. But he was meticulous about saving his money and keeping track of his money. So he was both accumulating skills and also building a nest egg for his later life. So he then returned to Niles, met and married Helen, and they had 2 sons, Earl Francis first, went by Fran, known as Fran first, and then Earl Duarte. And so they lived in the cottage adjacent to the garage. Now, I've got some photographs of the early days in the garage, and I want to point out a few details in some of these photographs. One of them is, of course, this is taken in front of the garage. And if you see some of the markings and the way the garage is painted, that's reflected in the way the garage is painted today. So we went back and wanted to recreate the appearance of the garage back in its earliest periods. There's also, this picture was taken in front of a car, and it looks like a new car. And I think this picture was taken because the garage was a dealership for new automobiles through the years. And I suspect this was sort of acknowledging the origin of the dealership at the garage. And you can see their 2 sons, Earl and Fran, and Frank and his wife. Now, this object in the back is a gas pump. This is an old gas pump. It's what's called a pre-visible pump. There's just a large round dial that indicates how many gallons of gas were pumped by hand into the automobile. And we'll see later on there's another style of pump that was used at the garage, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Over to the left, we see a car. That's a contemporary car traveling on the Lincoln Highway past the Lincoln Highway Garage. So that's kind of the setting of the garage back in its early days, probably in the early 1920s. Okay, so this is a little closer view. This is the boys, and from the dress and clothing they have on, my guess is that this photograph was taken at the same time as the previous photograph. Another view of the Lincoln Highway going right by in front of the garage. A little better view of the gas pump. And I was curious about this because the dial and all the valves and so forth inside the pump were just exposed to the weather. And so I researched that and found that that was a Wayne Model 276 pump. And in fact, this is part of an environmental enclosure. And at the bottom, that's not easy to see here, there's a cylinder that slides up and covers all of this. And I assume it could be locked to protect the pump from someone vandalizing it, or keep it from the weather, or from someone pumping gas while the station was closed. I also want to point out across the street, this is the Rock House, or the stone buildings across where there's a restaurant and other facilities. So that was in place at the time that the garage was built. And that area was generally known as Joesville and hosted a number of businesses over the years, both across what is now Portola and also across what is now L Street, or was then L Street as well. Early on, the 1917, this is an advertisement for the Highway Garage in a local newspaper. Chevrolet cars were sold there. And those of you who know about early cars recognize that the Durant Company, which was one of the car companies that was represented at the garage, combined with Chevrolet, and the Chevrolet company that was combined from Duarte and Chevrolet became part of the General Motors company. But in 1917, Chevrolet cars were sold in the Duarte garage. The garage was also a dealership for Durant cars, and Durant had several lines. The Durant Star, Flint, and several other car lines were part of the Durant company. This is an advertisement from the paper in 1927, the Livermore newspaper, advertising a new Silent 4. So it's a 4-cylinder engine, which they claim was as smooth as a 6-cylinder engine. And the innovation was, rather than having the engine bolted directly to the frame of the car, they had rubber isolators between the motor and the frame of the car. So I doubt that it was as smooth as a 6, and certainly not silent, but it's probably a big improvement over what was present at the time. You also notice that the Star car was sold for $550. So that's much different than what cars cost today, obviously. This is an article in the paper also talking about the new Silent 4 engine that was sold at the garage, and this was accompanied by a little logo from the garage with Frank H. Duarte as the proprietor. Another item that caught my eye, this is in the paper early on, was an item about Frank H. Duarte being imprisoned for an hour underneath his car. And I'll give you the essence of the story here. He had gone up Levi Hill to retrieve a car to bring back to the garage for repair, presumably. So he was using a tow bar, which we have at the garage on display, to bring the disabled car down the hill. Now that Levi Hill is up on the Morgan Territory Road, a steep section of road there. So the weight of the car being towed plus his own car was too much for the brakes on Frank Duarte's car, and it ran away from him. And the whole operation, his car and the tow car went off the road, and his car turned over. And he was partially under the car. His head and one arm were exposed. And so he was trapped under the car and unable to get out. So he was there about an hour. I'm not sure how they determined it was an hour, but in any event, a man came by, saw the predicament, and stopped to give aid. He used a fence post to pry the car up enough so that Frank Duarte could scurry out from underneath the car. And he could have been killed easily, but in fact, he was only bruised and had a few sore muscles. So it was really pretty interesting. And I thought that was would be an epic family story, but apparently it's also made the paper. Now I'm going to go through several photographs of the garage over the years to give you a sense of what it looked like over the course of the years as it evolved. There are several things that are notable about this photograph. Part of it by what you see, and part of it what is no longer there, and part of what's not there that you can see today. So let me point a few things out. First, you see these fairly major stanchions on either side of the street. Now this is L Street, and the Lincoln Highway, which is now Portola, passes off the left side of this photograph out of view. And we can see the north end of the garage looking a little different than it did a couple of years later. One thing, so what you can see in the picture is these pedestals and faintly a couple of pipes going up out of the top of the pedestal. Very faintly, there's a line across here, which we'll see in more detail in later photographs. That was a sign, Livermore sign that stretched across L Street. So this is L Street that went down towards Livermore. It's perhaps not evident to you, but the garage stops right here. Now today it continues on approximately twice as far down L Street. So initially the original portion of the garage was just this northern section that you can see in this sign, or in this view. You can also see an automobile stopped at the gas pump in front of the garage. This is a view looking towards the garage, and you can see that this is an interior wall now. At the time, this was the south wall of the garage, and so you can see this is done before the south portion extension of the garage was built. Here's a somewhat later picture taken in 1926, which shows the front of the garage looking more like it does the way it's painted today. You can see the east stanchion and the pole and the edge of the Livermore sign, and also the single gas pump here, that and a car at the gas pump. And you can also see just the edge of the cottage to the side of the garage, and a water tank tower, and a water tank on top of the tower. Now the tank is gone, but the cottage and the tower are still present. And the Earl and Fran's bedrooms was in the tower on the second floor of the water tank tower. That portion, this is probably a portion of the photograph that's taken for this article in the paper, showing the north entrance to town. It's an asphalt road. What you don't see is any development along L Street, and Livermore is way off in the distance, half a mile down the road, with pretty much just fields on either side of the road. And the article here is talking about the garage being a dealership for Starr and Durant automobiles. This picture is intriguing to me because it's taken in front of the garage, and shows two young men in a car. And it's obviously sort of been hot rodded. The fenders and part of the hood and the bumpers have been taken off. The top is missing. The windshield is missing. Now, no one has been able to tell me who those two are. I'm just speculating it might have been Fran and Earl Duarte in their late teens, mid to late teens, but that's only speculation on my part. You can see in the window into the office. Unfortunately, that's about the only picture we have that shows any detail at all inside the office. So that doesn't really tell us much about what the inside of the office looks like. So we have worked based on what people have told us and the physical evidence inside the garage. Now, World War II intervened. Both Fran and Earl were in World War II, both in the Army Air Corps. Earl was a B-17 pilot in Germany, over Germany. He was shot down, and we have a copy of a book in the garage of his experiences after having been shot down, and as his war experiences. I've concentrated on Fran here because of his history with the garage. As I mentioned earlier, both Fran and Earl lived in Livermore, made their lives in Livermore. Earl was in banking, so he was a banker in town, and Fran took over operation of the Duarte Garage after his father retired. So when Fran returned from World War II, where he was in the 2nd Air Force in the North Africa campaign, he worked with his father in the garage until his father passed away in 1949, and he took over the garage at that point. So this is Fran at a younger age. This is a somewhat later picture of the front of the garage. So as I mentioned earlier, the single pump was a pre-visible pump. Now, the only way that a motorist would know how much gas was put into their car was by a dial on the gas pump. And of course, it was possible for the operator of the garage to fiddle with the little stops on the dial and maybe pump a little less gas than what the motorists thought they were getting. So based on that concern, people started asking for some better way to know how much gas they were actually getting. So the visible pump was a response to that. Now there are 2 pumps in front of the garage, and this is a glass cylinder. Some of you may have seen these and be familiar with these. So in this case, the operator would grab onto a handle, a manual handle, and by hand pump gasoline up into that glass cylinder. Then once the gas is pumped up in there, use the hose to dispense that fuel into the tank of the automobile. That way the motorist knew how much gas they were actually getting because they could see it going down the hose and into their tank. So that's a later innovation supplanted ultimately by more advanced pumps that can't be fiddled with. So anyway, you see the variety of markings and so forth, but a somewhat later sign from the front of the garage. Now this is a photograph taken in 1968, and this is a dated photograph. I know when it was taken, and it's interesting in a number of regards. First of all, at this point, this is the road has been severed at this point. Highway 50 was the main highway. That's well north along the alignment of Interstate 580. So this was the road headed off towards Dublin. This is L Street transitioning either left or right onto that street. Joesville, the hotel, store, motor court, other things across L Street on the other side, on the west side of L Street. The 2 gas pumps we saw in the earlier photograph is here. Now this is a truck from Gallo Winery. So the Depression put a lot of the car companies out of business. Durant, as I mentioned, was absorbed by Chevrolet. The garage was no longer a car dealership. A lot of the traffic was no longer going by the garage on the main highway, which is now Highway 50 outside of town. So the garage reverted to being more of a machine shop and a repair facility. So the reason the Gallo truck is parked here is these are 2 bottle capping machines for screw top wine bottles that were from the Gallo facility in Modesto, California. So Fran got and made an arrangement with Gallo to repair those machines. So periodically they would bring these machines over to the garage for maintenance and repair. They would be delivered to the west side of the garage, rolled in through the side door, and then repaired. And then once they're repaired, rolled back out the west side, put on the truck, and the truck was here while they were being strapped down. So we can see the configuration of the truck and what the front of the garage looked like in 1968. Now this is a photograph of Fran, the only other photograph that I'm aware of that shows anything of the inside of the garage. So this is Fran looking out through his office window. And this picture was not dated, but from the cab over truck and the appearance of the road headed off towards Dublin, my guess this was also taken in the late 60s. And it does point out that we've been told that there was a lot of papers strewn and books and manuals and maps all over the office. And so this photograph of the shelf inside the office sort of confirms that impression. Now this is a photograph taken somewhere after the gas pumps were removed during the era, and also as you can tell, the water tank was removed from the top of the water tower. This is during the era when the garage is being operated as a machine shop and repair facility. And it's sort of, the painting has not been maintained. It's starting to look a little bit like a derelict building. And that led to some concern and led to the city deciding to annex that facility, take it by eminent domain, and extend the park, which went from the west side of the garage down to Livermore Avenue. They were intending to bulldoze the facility, and that was unfortunately very disheartening for Fran Duarte. In fact, I think he was quite bitter. He made the statement that I've heard through family members that they can take the buildings, but not getting anything in it. So he got rid of all the fixtures, machines, everything inside the garage to the bare walls. Now, fortunately, a lot of those materials were sold to members of the community here in Livermore through literally a garage sale. Some items were given away, some items were thrown away. And so, but a lot of items from the garage ended up in the local community and went to members of the family. And we've been extremely fortunate that community members and members of the family have donated items back to the garage so we can return them to the garage and return it back to what its appearance had been when it was in its reference period. This is, as you can see, the garage is stripped to the bare walls. I don't know the story behind that car. I don't think it had anything to do with the Duarte family. It's just a car that someone had parked in there. So anyway, that's what the garage looked like when the Heritage Guild got involved with it. And I do want to point out that the Heritage Guild was working with the city to avoid tearing the building down, successfully avoiding having the building and the cottage torn down, with the agreement that we would operate it as the Heritage Guild would operate it as a museum. So with that understanding, that arrangement, the Heritage Guild got involved with the garage. Now this is from 1981, when the north end of the garage was being repainted, as I mentioned, to approximate an earlier, more colorful version of the north end of the garage. And gradually it was being refitted with appointments and donated items to return the garage to its appearance when it was in operation. So I want to mention now, turn from some of the history of the garage to talk about some of the projects that are going on at the garage. So I mentioned that there were projects that were for the garage, that is sustaining the garage. For example, replacing the old weathered sign with a newer sign. In 2019, one of our periodic windstorms blew some of the galvanized roofing off the top of the garage. So we had to deal with that. So we arranged for the roofing to be repaired. So this is an example of the kind of work that we did at the garage to sustain it and protect it from weathering and further deterioration. Another example is the sewer pipes and water supply. So one of the, I'll call it, features of the garage for a number of years was these sewer pipes would stop up periodically. Now there's, if you visited the garage, you know there's a large live oak tree immediately adjacent to the garage and between the garage and the cottage, more or less. And the roots from the tree were very ingenious in finding ways to get water. Well, when the sewer was installed in the garage, replacing the outhouse, the tree roots got in through the joints in the clay pipe and invaded the pipes and backed up the sewer. So several years ago, we had the old clay sewer pipes removed and replaced with modern materials. At the same time, we had the old iron water supply pipes to the garage replaced with modern materials. So that's another example of a project to maintain and conserve the garage. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about projects at the garage. So probably the single largest, not probably, I'm quite certain, the largest single restoration project that was conducted in the garage was a restoration of the 1920 Seagrave fire engine. Now this was an original fire engine, the city of Livermore's first commercially built fire engine. It was purchased after the St. Michael's Church, the original St. Michael's Church, burned down in 1916. And there was also a brewery fire, so that pretty much convinced everybody in town that they needed bigger, better firefighting apparatus. So the city put out bids, asked for bids, and the Seagrave was the one they selected, mostly because it had the largest pump, the largest pumping capacity. So it's been owned by city and by the city of Livermore and in the city of Livermore since it was purchased in 1919 and delivered in 1920. So it was derelict in service until into the 50s, but then became derelict, stored outside for a number of years, and then subsequently sent to the garage, and then we restored it over the course of 4 years. So this is Irv Stowers and I heading out of the garage downtown for a rodeo parade. Another example of a project I mentioned earlier, the pedal-powered mower sharpening machine that Fred and Jay are working on there. But if you look in the left-hand corner, right up against the wall next to the gas pump, that red and white object is a Manley popcorn machine. So this is another restoration project that we undertook at the garage. So I want to say a little bit about that to illustrate the nature of some of the projects we do, the smaller projects. So that popcorn machine came from the State Theater in downtown Livermore. So I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the State Theater so you have an idea of the history of the popcorn machine. So this is a modern photograph taken before the pandemic times, because there aren't nearly as many umbrellas and tables outside as there used to be, but that's clearly the flagpole. And the Shannoni building on the right over here at one time was a theater, and it's marked Shannoni above it, and those markings, the building is still there and the markings are still prominent. So if you're downtown, if you don't know where it is, you can look for it and see it today. So that's where the theater was. Originally, it was called the Bell Theater into the 1920s. So again, that's the Shannoni building with the Bell Theater sign out in front. It then became the State Theater, and this is a picture taken probably in the 30s, looks like in the 30s, of the State Theater. No, 1931, it's just marked right there. Off to the very left-hand side is the Livermore Post Office. This is an interior picture of the theater, the State Theater, and it's pretty ornate, and probably as many theaters of that era that were theatrical theaters, vaudeville theaters, and eventually became movie theaters, had that more elaborate interior fittings. So that's what the interior looked like. And in the lobby, there was, of the State Theater, was the popcorn machine. Now this is a more photograph taken towards the end of the period of time that the State Theater was in operation. I believe it was taken in 1945 based on the Gildersleeve Ghost movie and the other Edie movie that are present on the marquee. The State Theater, however, closed in 1956. At that point, the popcorn machine left the theater. It had some sort of history that we don't know much about, but it ended up at the Duarte Garage, where it was sort of sitting next to the wall where you saw it in the earlier photograph, until we decided to make that one of our restoration projects several years ago. So we pulled it out from the wall, disassembled it to assess its condition. There was a fair amount of rust and a lot of a lot of dust and debris from the popcorn, salt and butter, grease from the salt making, from the popcorn making. So that had damaged the machine and interfered with its operation. So we disassembled it, fixed what needed to be fixed, and put it back together. And it is in operating condition today. Everything works. You could pop popcorn in it if you wanted. I resisted that because I would prefer not to have more corrosion and oil contamination, but we had popcorn and put it in the popcorn machine. Once it was completed, and once we were working on it, we were speculating whether or not there's anybody in town who actually operated this popcorn machine, and the answer was yes. Margaret Sorensen. It took a little bit of searching, but we found Margaret Sorensen, who, when she was in high school during World War II, worked as an usher at the high school and made popcorn using that popcorn machine. And so immediately before the pandemic started in February of 2020, well, as it was starting, Margaret came to the garage and posed for pictures with the popcorn machine, and then sat down with Don Keach, a lifelong resident of Livermore, fourth generation Livermore resident, and Anna Sigg, who's also a longtime resident, not an original resident from Livermore, but a longtime resident and a longtime member of the Heritage Guild. Sat down, and three of them talked about the popcorn machine and the State Theater, and then a lot of other topics. And I've got an hour-and-a-half video of them talking, which is a real treasure. I also want to point out that Anna Sig starred as a popcorn machine operator in a short video, which you can view on the Livermore Heritage Guild website. If you go to the video archive, you'll find about a 4-minute or so, 4 or 5-minute video on operation of the popcorn machine. So I encourage you to go look at that. Now, I want to stop for a moment here and say a word about our philosophy on these projects and the restoration of things in the garage. If there is a substantial amount of the original finish or appearance of the machine present, then we will conserve that. So the popcorn machine is an example of one where it was intact for the most part, only missing a few minor parts. It was intact, and most of the outside of the appearance of the machine was present. So we didn't repaint it. We didn't really do anything other than clean it up, fix what needed to be fixed, and put it back in operation. And if something is so badly damaged or rusted or not in good enough shape where the original finish is worth conserving, in that case, then we will restore it. And this is an example. This is a Champion spark plug machine, probably from the 1930s. And you can see it was badly rusted, covered with, in one case, as I was removing the paint from it, I could count 4 layers of paint applied by a brush. This looks like a tractor green paint brushed on. You can see the pressure gauge on the top of the machine the glass was missing, and it was completely encrusted with many layers of paint. So in this case, there's really no original finish to conserve. So we took it down to bare metal and restored it. So this is the appearance of the machine after it was restored. And I think by looking at the pressure gauge, you can get an idea that it was really delving down to the bare metal and starting over again to restore it to its original appearance. So that's kind of an example of how we treat the smaller projects in the garage. Now I want to switch to the present and tell you a little bit about what's currently going on in the garage. So we have a number of displays of historical things of Livermore, and in particular things of the garage, to the extent that we have those. So in the north end of the garage, facing Portola Avenue, we have 3 original fire engines from Livermore. In the foreground here, we call it a 1919, but they're parts from several years there. But a homemade chemical fire truck, 1919 Model T. Behind that is a Seagrave we talked about earlier with the hood up. And to the left is 1944 Mack. All of those original Livermore fire engines that have been in Livermore since they were new. Behind the Seagrave is the machine shop, where we have some original machine tools, original to the garage. And so the philosophy of the facility is that this north end of the garage, we want to return as much as possible to its original appearance back in the early, let's say in the 1920s. Now, the photograph to the right is a photograph of the garage looking north into the north end of the garage. And this is still a historical part of the garage, but we have more displays that will have other eras and other historical subjects around Livermore that provide a broader variety of projects. So now, what do we do with the garage now? Well, we host visitors, car clubs visit. This is when the Duarte Car Club came to visit. And this is kind of a really neat photograph in my view. You can see on the windows behind on the garage, the Durant name was painted on the office window. This is a Durant car parked next to that sign, and Stars parked on this window, and that's a Star car parked at that window. So we have a number of car clubs that like to visit and have the picture of their cars taken in front of the garage and appreciate the history of the automotive history and the machine shop, and just the history in general. We also have a nice relationship with the Lincoln Highway Association that I mentioned was started by Carl Fisher back in 1913. So in 2013, for the centennial of the Lincoln Highway, the Lincoln Highway Association has an annual convention in Nebraska. So the Western contingent started in San Francisco, retracing the route of the Lincoln Highway, headed for Nebraska. The Eastern contingent started in New York City, headed east, picking up people joining the convoy on the way, and they joined in Nebraska for the annual convention. Some people kept going from the West Coast, kept going east all the way to the East Coast and vice versa, and then they returned. So the Western contingent, their first stop, the first day, was at the Lincoln Highway Garage, where they toured the facility and had photographs, and then headed on their way east for the convention. Also, Lincoln Highway Association periodically has meetings in the garage. They're going to have a chapter meeting this spring in the garage. So we host car clubs. We also have open houses and host visitors on our open houses. So I would invite people to come to the open houses and see the garage in its current state. And something new we've been doing recently in open houses is having a featured car of the month. And the pictures that you see here are the cars we've had. The next open house is February 20th from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. And our open houses are the third Sunday of each month, with the exception of November and December, or I'm sorry, with May and December. May because of an annual auction we have in the garage, and December because of the holidays. And the poster on the left is a poster for the February open house, featuring a 1948 Chevy Fleetmaster pickup truck, or a station wagon. So anyway, that's kind of what I have to say, and I will stop sharing if I can get the button. Let's see. Okay. Okay, there we go. So I guess now we're ready. If there are any questions, be glad to attempt to address any questions you may have.
We don't have any questions yet. I don't know if anybody has any questions for Will.
Well, while we're waiting for questions, I guess I'd like to request some help from whoever may be listening. I've said a lot of stuff here about the Duarte Garage. I think it's all true, but I can't guarantee that. So I'm anxious to know if other people have additional information or corrections for what I've told you. Please get in touch. I really appreciate that. Also, people out there may have recollections of the garage that I'm not aware of that we'd like to add to the history of the garage we've collected. There may be people who have artifacts. We always welcome donations of garage-related artifacts to, again, continue to return it to its original appearance. And in particular, if you have any photographs, either of the garage itself or around Livermore that isn't part of the Heritage Guild archive, I'd certainly appreciate that. For example, Steve Leeds, his family operated the Associated Oil plant or facility on East Avenue and Almond Avenue. They don't have a photograph, as far as I know, of what that facility looked like. I'd be really interested to see what it looks like. We have a number of donations from Steve and their family in the garage from the Associated plant. So I'd really like to have a picture of what the plant looked like in the garage. So if anybody out there happens to have a snapshot of that, please get in touch and let us know. So again, I appreciate your help.
Hey, Will, we do have a couple questions coming in now. Someone wanted to know who built the building, and do you know how much it cost to build it? They missed the beginning.
I don't know who built it, and I don't know how much it cost, unfortunately. So I'm afraid I can't respond to either one of those questions. I will say an interesting discovery that we made in the garage. This doesn't have anything to do with the cost, but at least I know who built one thing. In the office, we have the original roll-top desk and Frank Duarte's typewriter and his desk chair. And the typewriter sat on a little shelf adjacent to the desk. And so that shelf was missing. I found it in the garage up on top of some things and restored it to the office. But on the bottom, there's a stencil of a local blacksmith shop. Apparently, Frank Duarte commissioned a local blacksmith to make that shelf. And so I know at least who made the shelf, but I don't know who made the rest of the garage.
Will, we have a question from Lena. She's wondering, when you do the restoration projects, how do you find people with expertise in these areas?
Well, we're fortunate that within the membership of the Heritage Guild, there are people with a lot of skills. And we have a wide variety of people who have a really impressive set of mechanical skills, artistic skills, woodworking skills. So we're certainly anxious to tap into the skills of those who are in the Heritage Guild. And we also welcome help from members of the community. First of all, welcome you to join the Heritage Guild and join other people who are interested in the history of Livermore, but also to lend your skills and knowledge to our projects. So that's kind of the process we have. Now, I will say that we're in the process of trying to improve our outreach to engage both for membership and also to engage members or members and non-members to volunteer their skills to help us with their projects.
Yes, well, Bruce actually asked how you could volunteer for the Heritage Guild. So thank you for answering that question. And you can contact any of us go onto the website. You can actually ask questions to the website or email any of us directly that our emails are on the board is on the website also. A question from Diane. She wanted to know, do members of the Duarte family still live in Livermore? And if so, do they take part in what you do at the garage?
Well, there has one person has stopped by the garage and introduced himself to me as a Duarte, but not the same branch of the family. So as far as I know, there aren't any close relatives of the garage Duarte people who live in Livermore. But we are in contact with members of the family who live elsewhere. And I mentioned that photograph, I guess I didn't mention, the photograph of the Gallo truck was donated to us this morning, believe it or not, by a gentleman by the name of Doug Wilson, who lived down L Street a block from the garage. He has donated a number of things back to us because he was close with Fran Duarte and had a number of items that Fran gave him. And so he's been very nice to return those things to us. So as far as I'm aware, there are no close relatives of the Duarte family, garage Duarte family in the local area. But if there are, I'd really like to know that and meet them and invite them to be involved with us at the garage.
Great.
Will, Scott Bradley wanted to know what some of your current restoration projects are.
Well, we have several going. I'm not sure of where all these things come from, but we have a wooden phone booth of probably late 30s, early 40s vintage, I would guess. And so in the process of redoing and adding some new display cabinets, we moved that out from the corner and are kind of refreshing that. So we've arranged for lights and cleaned it up a bit. So that's one of the projects we'd like to, I have this fantasy vision of being able to make a phone call from that phone booth and have somebody in the office pick it up from the candlestick phone that's in the office. We also have a switchboard sitting immediately adjacent to the phone booth. So it'd be terrific to be able to route the call through the switchboard to the office at the other end of the building. But that's one project. Another restoration project, or I'll say project, conservation project, is a Watlow scale, a penny scale that sat in the hallway on the way into the women's restroom for a long time. Broken parts, not clear if it worked very well. We've recently pulled it away from the wall and are currently working on that, trying to find missing keys, dredge coins out of the coin box so we can find the lock number and get a key made so we can get into the coin box and get it all working and replace the broken parts. So that's another example. That particular scale was made in 1949. That's we know that from the information on the inside of the thing. We have another donation from a ranch, the Home Ranch out on Mines Road. It's a Bowser oil tank, the 1908 vintage oil tank. So we're in the process. That's another case where it's restoration since they take it down to bare metal and repainting because there really wasn't enough of the original finish left to conserve. So that's a project in progress. It's a large tank, so it's a fair amount of effort to get working on it. And the weather hasn't been conducive to painting recently, so that's an ongoing project. But that's an example of the sort of stuff. We've got all kinds of projects, no shortage of projects.
Will, someone wanted to know, is there any of the bricks that were made in Livermore actually used when the garage was built? Do you know if there's any of them in the building?
Well, I can tell you for sure there are some in the building, not inside the building, not in this
Oh.
construction building. We have a display of bricks from the Livermore Brickworks down on near Stanley, where Heritage Estates is now. We have a number display there, which also includes some adobe bricks from Robert Livermore's house out near near the Arroyo, near 580. But as far as I can remember, I have not seen any bricks as part of the construction of the garage. It's redwood framing, galvanized metal, and then wood flooring in certain places. So I'm not aware of any brick construction. So I don't believe there are any Livermore built bricks in the construction of the building.
Thanks.
And Will, Sharon says that she thinks that when she was growing up, she understood that a Dan Murillo was part of the Duarte family, but she's not sure about that. She can try to locate him to see if that may be true and if he may have any information or history.
Okay, I think when Doug Wilson was here this morning, his name came up. They had a blacksmith shop down Portola Avenue, approximately across from Portola School on the north side. Now, I don't know, there may well be, one of the things I've learned is that back in the old days of Livermore, family connections were really intense. I mean, all kinds of people related to all kinds of people. So I don't know of any connection between the Murillo family or Dan Murillo and the Duarte family, but that's not to say it doesn't exist. I just don't know about it. And it's probably not a close connection, but there are lots of family connections around Livermore that are really interesting. I find fascinating.
And there are several people who appreciate the presentation and thought it was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And we also have Ray Arthur who wanted to recommend the PBS documentary about the Lincoln Highway, Horatio's Drive, America's First Road Trip.
Yes, yeah, that's really a good video. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. It looks like everyone enjoyed it.
Great.
We've had a lot of comments and questions in the chat. That was fantastic.
Yes, thank you. And I hope we'll see many of you at the open house on February 20th.
Great. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you so
Thank
much, Will. We always learn a lot from you when you come in and share all your photographs and all this information that you've researched. It's wonderful, especially to see Duarte's journal and to see the articles in the paper. But I can't believe he was trapped by his own car and got and survived that. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for coming. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.